Here's a time-lapse of our butterfly mosaic.
Start with a line drawing. Trace it out. Add the clipping shapes. Make the border segments. Add tiles to the borders. Space everything out. Add the inside tiles. Add the grout background. Add the second wing. Put on the antenna, and we're done. Now let me introduce you to the Inkscape Players I drafted for this project. First are my most valuable players. The first three are path effects, and the last two are object operations. Then come the key players. Nothing gets done without them. Finally, what I call the closer, because it finalizes any path effect on a given path. So the first thing we need is a line drawing to build our mosaic. Now you could sketch out the drawing yourself on a piece of paper, take a picture of it, and import it into Inkscape, and then use the Trace Bitmap feature to turn it into a vector. What I did instead is search Vecteezy for a vector graphic of a butterfly line drawing. There's a link for Vecteezy in the description if you're interested in checking it out. Now we'll trace out the parts of this line drawing we want to keep, and I'll draw a quick line here to show you that I'm using a fuchsia stroke color. I have no fill, and the stroke is 4 pixels wide. I'll start by using the ellipse tool to draw parts of the body. And as you can see, I want to overlap the lines so that the shape builder will be able to distinguish shapes when I use that later. Then I'll use the Bezier pen to draw the rough outline of the first shape I want to use. After that, I'll switch to the Nodes tool, add the curves to my rough outline. And finally, anywhere there is a curve, I'll capture all those nodes, make them smooth, and do a little more fine-tuning. Here's my completed tracing, and notice that all the line segment ends are overlapping to help out the Shape Builder tool later. Now we can set the antenna aside. Now let's select the entire tracing, duplicate it with Ctrl-D, group it together, and move it off to the side for future use. Now we can select the original tracing, turn to our Shape Builder tool, and make sure we're in Add mode. We can capture the body by holding down the mouse button while we drag the cursor along the body shape, and then we'll capture each individual shape within the wing. Once we're finished with that, we'll give all the wing shapes a light blue fill color and no stroke. And then we'll give the body a black color and no stroke. Then I'll group everything together because I want to go down and select one of my tracing copies below, and then shift-select the group on the page and align the tracing copies to what's on the page. Now that we're done with the Shape Builder for now, I can clean up the loose ends of these line segments. This is really optional, but I do like to clean up after myself, and I'm not going to worry about the loose ends inside the body because they'll be covered up later. Ungroup everything in the tracing, and then use the Nodes tool to get rid of the nodes at the end of the line segments if you can, or add a node where they overlap and then get rid of the end node. We're done with the line drawing, so we can let that go. Thank you for your service. It's time to add the tiles to our borders. I'll draw a black rectangle, and I played around with the size of the tiles and decided on a size of 20 by 20 pixels. It's important to right-click this tile and select Copy so that it's put into the clipboard. Now we can move it out of the way. So let me demonstrate adding tiles to our first border that we select here. We'll go into Path, Path Effects. We'll choose Pattern Along Path. The best option for copies is Repeated Stretched so that it fills out the entire line segment. Then my preferred option for Pattern Source is Link to Path in Clipboard, which has our tile. The resulting tiles pattern inherits the properties of the original path, which is a stroke with no fill. So I'll go ahead and set the fill color to black using the swatch down at the bottom. And I'll turn off the stroke by holding the Shift key and selecting the red X. We need some spacing between our tiles, so I'm using a value of 0.5, which turns out to be a 2-pixel spacing. Now that we're happy with this result, we can use Path, Object to Path to finalize the path effect, and as you see, it takes it away and just leaves a normal path as the result. By the way, the reason I like to use Link to Path in Clipboard are twofold. Number one, when you select the linked tile, you can see where it's being used if you haven't finalized that yet. And secondarily, when you change the size of the tile, you can see what the effect will be on the path. This way, if you're not sure of what size you want, you can play with it first and then finalize it. I've finished all the borders, and now I'm highlighting one of them to show that we need to work on cleaning up the endpoints where they overlap with other borders. We need to clip those away. We're going to do that by using the clipping shape that belongs to the border that's overlapping our endpoints. So let's select that clipping shape and duplicate it, and I like to turn it green because eventually that's going to go away. I'm going to use the offset path effect to mark out the area that we need to use for clipping. Notice that it comes up with a unit of millimeters, and we want to use pixels, so I'll select that, and then I can use the other drop down here to make that the custom default for the next time we use it. I want this shape to grow by 12 pixels because we have 10 pixels for the half of the border that exceeds the original path, and then 2 more pixels for the spacing. It's very important that I use Object to Path to finalize this path effect, otherwise the clipping that we need to do will not work. Now with that shape still selected, we'll use Shift and select the border we want to clip, and then use Object, Clip, Set Inverse Clip. Wow, that looks pretty good. We can see that it added a power clip path effect to this border, so we can finalize that as well by using Object to Path, and I'll turn it black again. There are a couple of exceptions to this process. Notice that on this border, the endpoints are overlapped by 2 different borders. So what we do in this case is increase both of the clipping shapes and use Object to Path on both of them, and then with them both selected, we use Path Combine so that they are one object, and then Shift select the border we need to clip and use the inverse clip to get that done. That looks good. The other exception is this border where we don't actually have a shape on the other side of it to do the clipping. In this case, we'll just offset the border that's overlapping it, combine it with the other clipping shape, and use Set Inverse Clip to get our desired result. Now we need 2 pixels worth of space inside each one of these borders before we can add our tiles there. So for each one of these clipping shapes, I'll offset it by -12 pixels, as I'm doing here, and make sure to use Object to Path to finalize that. When we're done with that, notice that a few of the shapes are deformed, and that can happen when you've got some pointed areas like this. That's not a big deal. We can just select the ones that need to be fixed, go to the Nodes tool, and do some cosmetic surgery using the nodes and the shaping handles. We can add or subtract nodes as needed. Hey, if you like this content, go ahead and subscribe. It'll help you get notified of new content, and it'll help me get the channel to grow. Now it's time to create the inside tiles for each of those shapes. Off to the side, I have a 20 by 20 black tile, and we're going to use the tiling path effect. It defaults to making 3 rows and 3 columns of our tile. I want to make this big enough to fit over the shapes that we're using, so I'll go with 15 rows and 15 columns. I want to use the same gaps we used on the borders, so I'll use 0.5 for gap X and gap Y. And finally, to make this a more realistic tile pattern, we're going to offset each alternate row by 50%. Okay, that looks good, so I'll use Object to Path to finalize that. I moved the tiles closer to our project, and I brought in another butterfly vector graphic from Vecteezy so I can borrow some of its colors. Now for each of my shapes, I'll make a duplicate of the tiles. Then I'll go to the Fill and Stroke menu to change the fill color using the eyedropper and borrow a color from my vector graphic. Then I'll move these tiles over one of the clipping shapes, and I'll raise it to the top if I need to. Then I'll select the tiles a second time so that I'm able to use the rotation handles, and I'll position the tiles over the shape so that I can get as many tiles inside the shape as possible. When I'm happy with that, I'll drop the tiles to the bottom. Now when I'm ready to clip, I will select the clipping shape and then Shift select the tiles. And this time I'll use Set Clip because I want to keep everything that's beneath the clipping shape. Okay, rinse and repeat with all the other clipping shapes. I added yellow as a fourth color. Now this is the stage when we're creating a real mosaic where the grout would be added. So let's work on that. I'm going to select just the wings pieces and group them together and drop them to the bottom. I still have a duplicate of our original tracing, which I need to use now with the Shape Builder tool to drag the cursor along all the wing shapes to make it one contiguous shape. When that's finished, I'm going to give it the grout color, and I'll use a 40% gray, and I will get rid of the stroke. With that selected, I can go up and Shift select the wing and align the grout background to the wing. Since this is going to be a background, he needs to grow by 12 pixels, so I'll use the Offset Path Effect to get that done. I'll drop it to the bottom to make sure the background looks good. I think it does, so now I'll use Object to Path to finalize it. I'll select everything and then use Shift Select on the body to remove that, so I can group together the wing and its background. I'll use the same process on a duplicate of the body. This time the offset only needs to be 2 pixels. I'll drop that background to the bottom and group together the body and its background. Making the second wing is just a simple matter of duplicating the original wing and then holding down the Control key, sliding it off to the right, and positioning it in place and dropping it down to the bottom. Let's finish the antenna by using the same process we used for creating the border tiles. It needs to be smaller though, so I'll use a tile of 10 by 10 pixels. This time, to create the background for the antenna, I will duplicate the tiles, give them the background color, offset them by 2 pixels, drop them to the bottom, and group the antenna together. Then I can simply duplicate it and position the two antennae together, and drop them to the bottom. We're done, and I dressed it up a little bit with a colored rectangle behind, and I think it looks pretty good. Let's go to the outro, where I have a few additional tips for you.
Okay, that was a fun mosaic project, and I hope you enjoyed it. My goal was to show you the process and not make the project overly complicated. There are a few tips I can give you now that I learned along the way. Number 1, if you have sharp angles or points in your drawing, then pattern along path does not behave very well. My solution to that is to break the path up into line segments like I did here, and apply pattern along path to each one, and then you can get rid of the overlapping later. So number 2, getting rid of the overlapping, you can even break apart one of the paths, let's say the middle one like I did here. Break apart the paths into the individual tiles and clip the individual tiles themselves. Now to do even more cosmetic surgery on this, you can use the node tools on the individual tiles to adjust them to make the clipping look even better. My third tip is you can actually apply a pattern along path to a shape instead of just a tracing, as I did over here. I encourage you to check that out yourself. Now in the future, I plan to do another mosaic project, which is a little more complicated, and I'll tweak the process a little bit. So stay tuned for that and subscribe if you'd like to be notified when that comes out. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.